Hello and welcome to Flood Risk in Communities and the Need to Improve Flood Risk Communications.
I'm Steve Litke with the Fraser Basin Council.
Robin Burke, Engineering Advisor for Flood Modeling with CCMEO at Natural Resources Canada.
And I'm Heather McGrath, the Geospatial Scientist with CCMEO at Natural Resources Canada.
So flooding is a common occurrence in many Canadian communities. There are many types of flood hazards: river flooding from heavy rainfall, rapid snowmelt, ice jams, coastal storm surge, tsunamis, etc. Average annual flood damages in Canada now exceed $1 billion. Many Canadians don't fully understand their flood risk. For instance, the terms that are used can be misleading or difficult for many people to interpret, and one example of that is the 1 in a 100-year flood terminology. The other issue, or one of the other issues, is that a single line on a map is a very difficult way to represent flood risk. It tends to imply that people are either in or out of a flood risk zone, and they either have or do not have flood risk. So one of the things we want to be taking a look at is a better way to communicate different zones of flood risk as well. So there are a few different paradigms to understand the components of risk. This is one that we like to use. So hazard combined with a combination of vulnerability and capability leads to a consequence. A consequence combined with a likelihood leads to risk. And all along the spectrum, we have uncertainty in terms of the data inputs that we have, the methodologies that we're using, and the outputs as well. So on the next slide, what we can see are the definitions that we will be employing for this exercise. These are taken from Natural Resources Canada, Public Safety Canada, as well as the United Nations Sendai Framework on Disaster Risk Reduction. I won't read through all of these, but you can refer back to this slide as well, just to make sure that you've got the terminology correct as we're moving forward.
So the water issue that we're proposing here is how can we better communicate the risk of flooding to communities and individuals within communities? There are many different types and styles of flood maps that have been developed across Canada in different provinces. And as Robin said, if you're outside the line, can one assume there is no risk, or is there variable risk for a variety of different flood scenarios? And we also need to consider how a changing climate is going to influence flood hazards going forward. This picture illustrates the example. This is a picture of part of the floodplain in the Lower Fraser River. And you can imagine a floodplain line or boundary going across that landscape. And a larger flood would extend that line further, and a smaller flood maybe wouldn't extend that far. And you see a lot of different assets and people and land uses are in the floodplain exposed to these risks that we need to better understand. So as we're saying, there's a need to improve flood risk communications based on authoritative data where that's available, and best available and defensible data. And so I think as part of the communications, we need to translate some of the technical jargon that's used in the realm of flood management. We need to explain the design flood, such as that 1 in 100-year, 1 in 200-year flood, and what that means to a citizen. What are the implications or consequences? Is there a clearer way to communicate this concept in a concrete way that homeowners can understand? And so, as Robin said, a single or solid line on a map might give a false sense of security in terms of what is in or outside of the flood hazard area. And our interactive tools, for example, a better way to approach this issue and communicate about flood risk. Here's another figure or photograph of the Lower Fraser floodplain. This is more in the urban area. And again, just to illustrate the complexity and the patterns of settlement and land use and how that is exposed to different flood hazards. So to better communicate, there's many different aspects here. We need to improve access to and understandability of data. We need to deal with varying data quality and availability. In many cases, there are limited data sets available to evaluate flood risk, and there are significant gaps. We need to communicate about climate change and the uncertainties related to not only climate change, but hazard, vulnerability, exposure, and risk. The one concept is to develop a scoring system of low, medium, high risk, or a numeric rating scale. And again, to consider visual, spatial, and interactive means of communications. This map here is an illustration of one of the data sets that we have available for the Lower Fraser. It's an illustration of a year 2100 projection of a 1 in 500 year flood event. And there's sea level rise as a component here, higher peak flows on the Fraser. And so this illustrates some of the complexity and some of the assumptions and definitions involved in the extent and depth of flooding in different parts of the lower Fraser.
So we'd like to leave you with a few takeaways about this topic. We're looking for one of the teams to develop a user-friendly method in order to communicate flood risk to citizens and our communities so that they can raise awareness and inform actions and decisions related to floodplain mapping and flood risk communication. We've included a few examples here as well of a few different sites, one in New Orleans, one in North Carolina, and then this Flood Tools that has global coverage. To give you some kind of starting points to think about how to develop your app and what you can build on. Another idea would be a web portal or maybe an API that could be connected in through the Realtor website, akin to what we have as a walk score in order to better improve communication to citizens and communities about their flood risk awareness. We've also included a few data resources. Federally, there's a number of open data portals that have information through GeoGratis. You can download data sets based on a watershed or a city or a geographic region of interest. There's also river gauge station data available from the Water Office. And then if you search on the open data portal, you'll see a variety of different data sets that you could leverage. From the Lower Mainland region in the Fraser Basin Council, there's also a number of data resources from the floodstrategy.ca, and there's a number of different coastal flood scenarios that have been developed and mapped that give us estimates of flood depth and extent. And we've also included the Okanagan region that has some data sets available as well, including LIDAR and topography and some preliminary hazard maps. If you'd like any more information about the topic or ask us some questions, please reach out to us via email. So please register and connect at the following link to join us in this challenge. And if you have any other questions about the hackathon, please contact Yasmina at hackworks.com. In addition, we want to thank our founders, supporters, and funding partners for this AquaHacking 2020 challenge.